Sonic Lost World, a pretty controversial game on its own, but what some choose to praise or ignore is the handheld variant of this Wii U title.
Lost World is just one of those games you end up hating or loving, and there really isn't an in-between. So I decided, because I hate myself, I would actually go on ahead and replay both versions of Lost World and decide which one I believe to be better and which one to be worse. And although the debate between the two seems pretty cookie cut, let's take a deep dive at which one really is the superior version of Sonic Lost World.
Alright, before we dive in, let's lay out how we're going to structure this comparison.
I decided that the best way to look at both versions of Lost World is through a point system. That means for each aspect of the game we'll review, we'll award to the point to the version which we believe did it better. And by the end of our analysis, we'll tally up the points to determine which version of Lost World truly stands out as the superior one.
So to kick things off, let's talk about the story, as it's the backbone of any great game. Oh, wait, we're talking about Sonic Lost World.
So, unsurprisingly, the general plot of Lost World actually features no major differences, going all the way from the start of the game to the end. Most of the cutscenes that are present in the HD version of the game are shown in the demade version, except they're extremely compressed and just, well, they don't look terrible necessarily, but, you know, they look as good as you'd expect them to. You can't really save these cutscenes, so since this aspect of the games are basically identical, we'll give this point to the Wii U version of the Lost World since the cutscenes just look better there.
Following the similar plot shown off in both games, now we're going to be talking about the presentation in both titles.
Now, let me get this point clear across. I'm well aware one game graphically looks better than the other. However, when I refer to the presentation, I'm talking about the actual look of the levels, the bosses, and things of that sort. With the levels themselves, and after looking at both versions of the stages, I actually believe the 3DS version of the game wins in this aspect for the sole reason that Sonic and Tails in this game are on the Lost Hex, which is a very split up and broken world, and going from each zone to zone feels more like a hex. Think about Super Mario Galaxy and how in that game Mario is traveling from planet to planet and is very clearly in space. Now when comparing this with Sonic Lost World, a lot of the levels feel like they can belong to any other Sonic game, and that really doesn't represent the environment that both Sonic and Tails are currently in at all. This game just lacks that element most of the time, and it really doesn't add up when we see a big worm from the Lost Hex in Forces, which is just Green Hill. What a way to shit on a new environment. My point can be continued into the bosses. The look and feel of each of these bosses is very open, and this can be presented with just a look of each boss when comparing the two different versions. Now, this isn't to diss the Wii U version of the game either, as there are plenty of stages that feel very open and very random, but when comparing the two, the 3DS version just exceeds when it deals with this.
Following the presentation, we have the controls of Sonic, and yes, although they're pretty similar, there are some substantial differences.
Starting off, when we look at both games, they both feature a parkour, a run button, homing attack, and all that jazz. Where the differences lie though is how some of these set parts of the movesets differ. Firstly, the mapping of the buttons are changed to basically where the spin dash and bounce buttons are mapped to the same spot, so you can't jump and continue a spin dash like you can in the HD version, which bummed me out because that was one of my favorite parts of Lost World. This was a change I saw as unnecessary, as there are more than enough buttons on both consoles to map the buttons in the exact same style. The next major thing would be how Sonic's kick works. In Lost World HD, if you were to homing attack onto a target Unleashed style by pressing two different buttons to homing attack, you'd perform this kicking move. However, in the 3DS version, Sonic performs this kick midair, which shoots out a projectile, which I actually kind of prefer as this can stun enemies and even make some sections of the game easier. So this is a welcome change to the game. In this game, when you're controlling the Wisp, which we'll talk more about later, it's actually mapped just to a trigger button, but in the 3DS version it's just mapped to the bottom screen, which just makes sense. So you know how Lost World has that weird homing reticle? Now in the 3DS version you can actually see when it reaches its max charge of 5 much more easily. In the HD version you can only beat Zavok by charging the reticle 5 times, but the UI really didn't show this correctly and it just capped at like 4. This makes the 3DS version reticle much more readable. Regardless though, control scheme wise, I'm going to be giving this point to the HD version of the game, as yes, while that projectile is nice to have, it really doesn't change a lot, and it's much more preferable to have the spin dash mapped to its own separate button and not have any overlapping control schemes.
Following into my next point, we're going to talk about the level design.
Each of the zones featured in Lost World do make an appearance in both versions, with Windy Hill, Desert Ruins, Tropical Coast, Frozen Factory, Silent Forest, Sky Road. Wait a fucking second, is that Golden Palace? Well, obviously not, but it's pretty funny that the two zones share an uncanny resemblance. Oh, and the last zone is also, again, Lava Mountain. The map features a similar layout too, with 3 regular levels and 1 boss level format, which is fine. But this is sort of different from the mini-boss present in each Act 2 of the HD version of Lost World stages. Now, when it comes to the levels themselves, the first thing you'll notice initially is how differently the levels actually implement the parkour system a lot more into the level design. This is something that I do believe the HD version doesn't do enough of, and it feels like they do the bare minimum. We only see bare bones parkour in the cave level and that one sky level, and these levels are so generic that I'm really calling them by what they look like at this point. While in the 3DS version, I do feel the name of the stages match the environment a lot more in the ones that Sonic speeds his way through. Now, while this aspect of the levels feels great, what really diminishes this for me is how gimmicky these levels on the 3DS actually are. Starting from the first level, and what you'll notice all the way to the end are, for example, these enemy gates that require you to defeat a certain amount of badniks before progressing, which I personally don't think are a good addition considering it breaks the pace of gameplay and it really is annoying to deal with, especially on certain stages. Or, if you don't have a boss gate, you might need to defeat some boss enemy that covers a spring to the next section of the level, which in that case it's in the same problem where I think it breaks the pace and it's just really annoying to deal with. There's also other gimmicks which are a lot worse, like pushing apples, which is like one of the worst things ever, and it even returns with a variant with snowballs later.
Who's the popcorn eating motherfucker that came up with that?
Now, while at times the gimmicks don't seem too bad, and honestly sometimes I did enjoy the level design of the first few areas of the game, the levels do start off a lot stronger than the HD version, but somehow plummet down to a quality that is far worse. Some of these levels are far too gimmicky. Some examples can be shown off in levels like Tropical Coast Act 3 with an entire underwater stage using the drill, which doesn't really control all that great, or Skyroad Act 3, which features a fucking rocket riding section using gyro controls with an insane amount of parkour, which I'm not exactly sure is a good thing. Lastly, Frozen Factory Act 3, which I think is the worst case of this, being quite literally a maze where the snowball gimmick comes from, and it's where the puzzles make no sense to the point where I had to ask a friend of mine for help since I literally had no clue where I was going. This only worsened when the wisps are introduced into the scene.
I won't lie, I'm not the biggest fan of the wisps, and I think that they should have been a one-time gimmick, but here they are.
The one thing I loved in the HD version was that there was a level or two that needed the wisp as a requirement to beat the stage or get past a section. However, in Lost World 3DS, that is not the case. A lot of these levels unfortunately require them to beat the stage. I will give credit where it's due and admit that they are better implemented, but they really don't need these gimmicks, and I think that it's overdone. I guess something neat though to mention is that like Colors DS similarly, there are some game exclusive wisps here that make an appearance. In the HD version of the game, there's a total of 8 wisps, while in the 3DS version it only features 6. However, they do bring the return of the burst wisp and introduce a new exclusive wisp with the Ivory Lightning Wisp, which allowed for some cool parkour sections using lightning as a way to grapple from each lightning rod to traverse the stage. One of the last things I can mention is I noticed a lot of these levels tend to actually take over 7 minutes just for one single stage, which I think is ridiculous. I thought it was bad in Superstars. Forgive me, perhaps I treated you too harshly. Now, when it comes to the level design, you really just gotta pick your poison here, because in one hand, you have levels that do not do enough and are bland as shit, or in the other, you have one that does far too much and well, you can see how that turns out. So my personal pick for who earns this point will again be the HD version, as I prefer a simplistic level than one I can't just stand to replay for any reason.
Moving past the level design, something new introduced in Lost World 3DS are the special stages.
Normally to become Super Sonic in the HD version, you just need to collect all the red rings in the game, which is something I have yet to do, but well, because I hate myself, but not to that extent. To access the special stages on the demade version of Lost World, it's pretty simple. Just make it to the goal with 50 or more rings, and you will receive a prompt offering you with a chance to snag up a Chaos Emerald.
Now, I'm not kidding when I say this, I've gotten 3 big headaches from playing these special stages. All I'm saying is, don't eat dinner before playing them.
The way you control Sonic in these special stages is by using gyro with the 3DS and moving Sonic around with a boost, and while you're in these stages, you just need to watch the timer and collect blue, red, yellow, and rainbow orbs within the time limit. See, the hard part isn't actually playing the special stages, it's more so not trying to fall on your ass while doing so. Honestly, none of them are very difficult, I just think the way to control them is slightly annoying, but I was decent at them because I used to be obsessed with that old 3DS game, Face Raiders, so, you know, shoutouts to them. Now, just so you guys know, red rings do make an appearance on the 3DS Lost World levels too, but if they don't give you the Chaos Emeralds, what do they do, you might ask? Well, turns out that if you collect all the red star rings in a world, they will unlock that world's extra zone, and collecting the red star rings in all the extra zones will unlock Lava Mountain's extra zone, which features a more difficult version of the game's final boss, which I don't care enough to do myself. Sorry, not sorry. Super Sonic almost feels identical in both versions, so there's that. Oh, and the way to activate him is with the bottom screen, which again makes sense.
Without a doubt though, I think the next point is going to be going to the Sonic Lost World 3DS version, as it gave me a pretty easy way to get the Chaos Emeralds without me wanting to blow my brains out. So, great job.
The bosses are typically one of the things some people will look forward to in any video game. I will proudly say Sonic is healing, and some of the boss fights in his more recent titles are fucking phenomenal. However, this game is not one of them. In my opinion, they are just as bland as the HD version. I will be honest and say that they are different, and one thing I'll give the 3DS version credit for is that the bosses don't die in less than 15 seconds, which is definitely just better. But one main gripe I have is that most of the bosses implement the wisps, which is just Why? Now, granted, some of these boss fights are better, like for example, Master Zig's fight, which has a pretty cool way to implement the fruit element, which is just present throughout the entirety of Tropical Coast. Xena is another great boss, which was introduced in the 3DS version when compared to whatever the fuck they had going on in the HD version. One main critique I have though is when skipping to the rematches with each member of the Deadly Six and Lava Mountain on the HD version is they actually featured new boss fights for each rematch, while in the 3DS version they just reused the already previously shown boss fights. So, Zavok's boss fight is once again, I don't know, a really dumb skydiving gimmick, which I don't even know if his random ability to grow 1000 times his size like a rip-off Bowser is better, but I mean it's something. The final boss is still the Egg Robo, which I'm not sure why he's called that because bro will never be him. However, its attack patterns use new different attacks based on the wisps you've been using throughout your journey rather than the Earth's life energy. So when you think about it, the 3DS version of the final boss is more similar to the final boss of Sonic Colors than the Wii U version. In the Wii U version, the bot only had 3 attacks, and the 3DS version just has more attacks, but they involve copying your powers just like the Nega Wisp armor.
When thinking this section over, I do think the 3DS version has the better bosses, as yes, although those rematches were unoriginal, they do have more memorable bosses than the ones you can just take out in like 2 seconds.
The final aspect of Sonic Lost World that I'll be touching upon is the bonus content. So first off, starting with the 3DS version, which mainly features a multiplayer race mode in which 4 players either locally or online can race through multiple levels of the game. Along with this, a fighting mode where, again, up to 4 players control a red, blue, yellow, or green virtual hedgehog and attempt to earn the most rings. The special stages can also be played in multiplayer, which is a fun little gimmick. Now, when moving on to the Wii U version, it actually contains versus races where the players control different colored virtual hedgehogs in numerous zones which are redesigned for this multiplayer mode. This mode can only have 2 players as one of their players has to use the Wii U gamepad as their main screen and the other one just uses the other monitor. Following the multiplayer, Lost World on the Wii U also features multiple DLC levels, one for Nights into Dreams, The Legend of Zelda featuring a nice Link attire for Sonic to don on, and even a Yoshi's Island level which allows you to throw eggs just as Yoshi would.
When covering all this different content in mind, I believe this point is going to be going to the Wii U stages, as we get a lot more new and unique content which is featured in those DLC stages.
Moving on to the final ranking, both versions of Lost World have been through the ringer, when put to the test on who handled what better. The final tally goes for the 3DS version of Lost World winning a point for presentations, bosses, and Chaos Emeralds, giving them a total of 3 out of the 7 possible. And when moving on to the HD version of the game, they won points for story, controls, level design, and bonus content, thus making Sonic Lost World for the Wii U and PC version the superior version of the game.
While I do admit both have their own pros and cons, I do also think that some of these games are just a little overhated sometimes. Well, maybe not the 3DS version, that one needs a little bit more hate, but you get my point.
But I think that this is a fun way to handle talking about a game I honestly never gave a fair chance to. After all, this was my first time beating Lost World on the 3DS. Now, would I play it again? God no. But when putting it side by side with its brother, it was fun comparing which game did certain things better. Now, if you disagree with me on any of my points, please feel free to let me know in the comments down below, as I'd love to hear what you guys think on which version of Sonic Lost World you find to be better.
Hey, welcome to the end of the video. Socials to my Twitter, Twitch, and Discord will be in the description down below if you need them. Huge thank you to all my members of the channel, and thank you guys for even giving me a dime. If you want to have your name be at the end of videos, make sure you press that join button right next to the subscribe button, which you should also totally press anyways, because guess what? It's free, and if you forget it for whatever reason, you can always come back and unsubscribe later. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a good one.